If you want to be front run, you can go to Citadel right now. They will front run you every day, and they will sandwich you. So L2s give you the exact same experience. The sequencer will cause the MEV to be awarded to a set of actors that are beyond your control. And it's not the Ethereum thing underneath is just a sideshow. You are really beholden to whichever L2 that you are actually using. And that fractionalization, that division of capital, that division of liquidity is not a good long-term vision for any chain.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Empire. We've got Santi and myself hosting today, and we are really lucky to be joined by John Wu, president of Ava Labs, and Emin Gün. I'm not entirely sure.
Good, but it's all good.
Gün, all right. The co-founder, or founder and CEO of Ava Labs here. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hey, thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, really excited about this. All right, so here's kind of what I'm thinking for this episode. We can take this in a lot of directions. I think it'd be really helpful to outline the thesis. Like, what is the core thesis that you guys set out to accomplish when you set out to build Ava Labs? Then I think I want to get into all right, we're sitting here January 2023. I think the consensus kind of trade right now, the consensus is Ethereum. And there's some other narratives kind of going on, which is Cosmos, like some other L1s, some L2s. And I want to see where you guys kind of see yourself fitting into that. Then we can get into some of the things you've built. John, you've been pretty influential leading partnerships with folks like KKR. Emin, I know there's a lot of stuff on the technical side that's really interesting, but I think it'd be helpful. Let's just start very high level. Can one of you outline the core thesis for what you're building?
Sure. So when we started out, I think it was very, very clear to us that blockchains were on the verge of being able to support the digitization of all of the world's assets. That's the central goal that we built Avalanche for from day one. And it was very clear to us that there was going to be absolutely no chain in existence, no single chain that could conquer this. So from the ground up, we built a system that has an architecture that allows anybody to create their own chains within the framework provided by the underlying system, with their own rules, with their own virtual machines. So Avalanche is a multi-virtual machine, multi-validator set, kind of an infrastructure for those of you who are tech savvy. If you're not tech savvy, what this means is the number of transactions per second, the capacity of the system is infinite. The finality is the fastest of any chain that is truly decentralized. So this is the system uses a consensus protocol that's unique and is the fastest of its kind, and so it finalizes transactions in about the blink of an eye, in about 1 second, and it's flexible. And one of the most interesting things about this flexibility is it can allow for compliant issuance of coins, compliant digitization of coins. And once again, the goal was to take the 700 trillion worth of assets out there and provide the right infrastructure, both technically, legally, from a compliance perspective, from every perspective you could imagine, that could absorb that growth that was going to come towards blockchains. So that was our mission. And it differs very much from systems like Ethereum, which are a single chain system, from systems like Bitcoin, which are a single asset system. So this is a chain built from the ground up for supporting a multitude of very different kinds of assets.
Jason, when we knew each other from a while back, even before Ava Labs, I was running that team that was trying to tokenize private securities. And while doing that, even though it was mechanically possible, regulatory wise, we had the right licenses, the technology back then, it was just really Ethereum, wasn't there. And I was super excited to see, Gün and his team actually have the best technology that was there. It could really scale. It can really tokenize the world's assets. And that's where we're headed towards.
So I think you guys nailed the early thesis, which is that like these monolithic blockchains weren't going to be able to handle the world's compute as the world's compute moved onto a blockchain. I think you nailed that thesis. But so did some other folks, I'd say, right? And people approached this problem from different angles. So like the Ethereum crowd, I would say, approached this by building L2s, like the Optimisms and Arbitrums of the world. The folks at Cosmos are working on like the app chain thesis, right? Where they build these different zones. What you guys have done is, so you've got like the C chain where tell me if my understanding of this is wrong, but like C chain kind of settles the smart contracts. You've got the X chain for like asset swaps, and then you've got the P chain for metadata. Then every application, whether it's like a game or an NFT thing, can go build their own zone within these subnets, or excuse me, can go build their own subnet. So maybe can you explain like why you think the subnet strategy is the right strategy here?
Sure. So, in a nutshell, the reason why the subnet strategy makes sense is that the subnets provide a uniform architecture for everybody to plug into and to cooperate well together. So think about your L2s. Think about any other discombobulated design where someone says, I'll give you just the base, you do whatever you like on top. What's going to happen in those cases, I've been saying this for a while now, and we're seeing exactly this play out. First of all, the technologies that that direction, that vision is yielding are not decentralized. People end up building highly centralized L2s. Those highly centralized L2s are no better. They do not carry over any of the inherent properties of the layer one underneath. They're not censorship proof, for example. And they award all MEV to a single actor. They end up essentially recreating the traditional world that we have with people front running, etc., in the blockchain system. In contrast, when you go to subnets, you have a uniform architecture. Yes, anybody can create their subnet, and all of those subnets they provide the same API. So when it's time to interact with a subnet on Avalanche, it's very similar to interacting with any other subnet. Whereas with layer 2s, every layer 2 is unique and different. So that uniformity is key to adoption and key to interoperability. And we also provide the warp solution for messaging between subnets. So you don't have to have everything replicated on a subnet. You can do your unique things on your subnet and rely on the services of an existing network, an existing chain, when it's time to do swaps, when it's time to connect to the real world, when it's time to connect to exchanges and so forth. So that's at a very high level the biggest difference. That is, we provide a unified architecture for people to do any kind of a flexible thing they want, but regardless, maintain the same APIs, the same interfaces for applications.
It's a technical advantage that Gün and the team have built that's really eloquent, I would say. From a business perspective, the developers and the application developers that have come to us, they love it because it's actually a blockchain. I mean, every blockchain should do like probably 4 things. It needs to execute, it needs to settle, it needs to have a consensus registry, and it needs to have data availability. When you're dealing with the L2s, they don't do all of that. A subnet, you get all of that. And that's very attractive to a lot of business partners.
Maybe touching on that point, John, would love to understand the early the traction that you've been getting. What are the type of, are you seeing a lot of developers that have been building on Ethereum or other chains migrate over to Avalanche? Or these new developers that are coming from traditional tech companies that are interested in building? And then touching a little bit on the use cases that you're seeing emerge that are getting most traction in Avalanche.
So the first answer is both. And people have realized you can't batch all the stuff into one blockchain. And that's the beauty of the subnets. It allows developers to have their own execution environment. From the traditional world, a lot of the, call it financial partners we have, they want compliance, they want regulatory oversight, and they need a certain environment that's different from the many gaming environment that have high throughput, and they care about different things. They're different execution environments. So they get that flexibility that Gün talked about earlier and creating the type of subnet they have. Now, we just started rolling out the subnets in the back half of the fourth quarter. There's about 6 or so live on the mainnet, and there's about 100 that's in the pipeline for this year. So it's a super exciting year for subnets.
I guess really curious if you could expand more on when you say kind of regulatorily compliant. As we all know, regulation is becoming more of a central theme and going to become more important. What are the key properties that make you more regulatorily compliant that would make someone like a KKR or a Deloitte want to build on Avalanche versus go and build on Ethereum?
I'll give you a simple answer, but in reality, it's not a simple thing. It's very complicated. It depends on the asset, depends on the type of players involved, it depends on the jurisdiction, whether it's US or overseas. So there's so many different configurations, and this is what's important about the subnet. When you want to roll something out for a payment purpose, or you want to roll something out for a security or an asset that you're tokenizing, you have different requirements. And it's not that as simple as just doing KYC, AML, at the smart contract level. we allow them to choose the validators at the network layer and the validator level. So they are more comfortable with the other players that are in this system. So it allows them more freely to do things.
Is that just the 2023 version of what we saw in 2017 with like enterprise blockchains, these like private blockchains or permissioned blockchains, I guess you want to say?
That's different because those are private blockchains. Here, one of the great things that frankly a KKR or one of these large asset managers like is that at some point when they're ready, it can have an easy gate opening, so to speak, or an API into the rest of the permissionless world. That flexibility is what they really like.
Guys, I actually want to go back to something that Emin was saying. So this original thesis, I get what you're saying that like L2s are not composable. Like something built on Arbitrum cannot talk to something built on Optimism too easily. But if you look at, again, like I think that the app chain is kind of coming into, is like really in the narrative right now. I think a lot of folks are building on Cosmos because of that reason. Is that kind of where you took this thesis from, or is that where, like what Cosmos has done with interoperability between the zones, is that what you're talking about when you mean like composability between networks?
You could say that what Cosmos is doing is very similar to what we're doing. There are some huge technical differences, but Avalanche was in the making when Cosmos was in the making, so I don't think anybody copied from anybody else. I think what you're really seeing at a high level is that there was sort of the blockchain version 1 with Bitcoin, single asset, single chain. Then there was blockchain version 2 with Ethereum, which is multiple assets, a flexible infrastructure, but still a single chain. And now you're beginning to see about 3 chains, which is Avalanche, Cosmos, and Polkadot. They're all about being able to support multiple ways of building chains. And they have technically very different architectures, and they face very different limitations as a result. But we are the most flexible of these, of this version 3 of blockchains, the latest, greatest wave of blockchains.
Jason, it's like this. When this cross-chain interoperability is fully capable, right now, warp messaging is beginning, as Gün said. A lot of these chains, whether it's a gaming app or whatever, in the subnets, they will ultimately have access to the large DeFi ecosystem of Avalanche. That's not possible just an app-specific chain like Cosmos.
So one of the big differences between you guys and maybe someone like Cosmos or Solana or a lot of the other L1s that have kind of these like alt L1s is that you actually chose EVM. You chose to build on EVM instead of a lot of folks. Looking back, do you think this was the right decision, the wrong decision, some pros, some cons? Would you do this again?
I would say that was absolutely the right decision, and we nailed it. We were one of the very first people to go out there and say, enough of these, essentially just modestly mutated new chains, new virtual machines. We already have a virtual machine that's been vetted. It's the EVM. We already have an ecosystem, and that ecosystem is hampered by lack of scalability in the infrastructures that are supporting it. Namely, Ethereum, especially at the time, was incredibly limited. It was based on proof of work. And the proof of stake switch, it wasn't clear when it was going to happen. And if it were to happen, it wasn't clear what kind of capacity it was going to bring. And it did happen now, but the capacity that, it did not bring much capacity to Ethereum, nor did it bring finality. Finality times actually increased. So we saw this and we thought, okay, there's an opening here. The EVM is great for the API developers. People know how to audit things built for the EPM. They know how to audit Solidity code. They understand everything about EVM bytecode. So that's why we picked the EVM, and we've been helping the EVM ecosystem grow by providing a new infrastructure that's far more scalable than Ethereum itself.
Where do you see the role of Avalanche in I think there are 2 things that are going to be big trends in 2023. It's L2s are going to continue developing, and then you've got these like ZK EVMs. So I guess I think demand for block space seems to be getting filled by, right now at least, like new tech on ETH. So I'm curious, why, if I'm a developer building something new, why would I choose to build on Avalanche versus you've got the liquidity, the security, also like the brand name of ETH and their L2s. What is that argument?
So there are lots of different ways to look at this from different perspectives. If you are in this game because you believe in decentralization then it's a no-brainer that the Avalanche system provides you the most decentralized, the most censorship-proof, the most free, the most open infrastructure. When you look at the L2 vision, each and every one of those L2s today is a hope and a dream that's being sold to the masses. None of them are decentralized. There's always a centralized entity. The sequencer is centralized. There are some centralized entities in the execution engine in the background. These things stop. And at the end of the day, they are no better than what we started out with. If you want to be front run, you can go to Citadel right now. They will front run you every day, and they will sandwich you. So L2s give you the exact same experience. The sequencer will cause the MEV to be awarded to a set of actors that are beyond your control. And it's not the Ethereum thing underneath is just a sideshow. You are really beholden to whichever L2 that you are actually using. And that fractionalization, that division of capital, that division of liquidity is not a good long-term vision for any chain. What you're going to end up seeing on that front is you're going to see, again, centralization around, whatever dominant paradigm is people are talking about. And people will hop from one to the other, but the problems will move with them because not a single person here is actually addressing the issue. There's a punting of the issue from L1 to L2s. L2s themselves don't know what to do. They're single chains, each and every one of them themselves. And people all want to be on the same big connected thing. And you will see that as they move from one to the other, they will carry their problems with them. Avalanche is different in the sense that it offers quick finality that none of these L2s offer. It offers decentralization and lack of any single entity in control. It does not award MEV to any single actor, and it provides a user-built, user-structured, user-defined, incredibly flexible environment for people to do whatever they want on. And so I think that a combination is quite a winning one because there's nothing like it in the L2 world. And I will say this. There's a huge, I think you guys as technical people, you should actually you should be one of the main people to remind everyone that the L2 vision and the L2 reality are miles apart, that this is a game, this has become a game of as you well know, L1 founders constantly holding a carrot in front of a big mass of people who demand certain properties, but never delivering that carrot. There's like no shortage of L1s, as you know, where there's going to be a new paper, a new system, a new release that will bring us that coveted feature of decentralization or high TPS or what have you. And the same is true for L2s. Look at all these L2s. They're all hopes and dreams. Not a single one is untrusted. You have to trust the L2 operators. And it's just, there's, I think, one experimental L2 that somebody once constructed and then discarded that nobody is using that has some lack of trust in it. But if I have yet to see any implementation of fraud proofs. So those visions are just words. And like many others in the system, there are people who just constantly provide you a dream where the actual reality falls far behind. And we saw this with many other technologies, right? We saw it with VRFs, VDFs, accumulators. They were all supposed to be the solution to our scalability needs. Now it's L2s. Well, where are the VRFs, VDFs, and RCAs? They all got discarded. They weren't feasible. And I don't know that any of these things that are being touted as, oh, this is going to solve all these problems are actually demonstrated to solve anything whatsoever. So yes, there's a bunch of people who think, oh yeah, this could potentially work someday. Well, great. That day is not today. And if you want something that works, and if you want something that's decentralized, that is in the main crypto ethos, then that's Avalanche. If you want something centralized, you want to award MEV to a bunch of your friends, then you could pick an L2 with a bunch of friends in it.
We're used to, I take your point around the L2s and the sequencer not being decentralized. I mean, some teams, not all L2s are created equal. I think there are nuances and, we don't have the folks of Arbitrum or Optimism or, if you want to consider Polygon in that discussion as well, to push back on it. But I'll ask you just more of a general question. In blockchains, you always are skeptical when you can achieve all three components, right? There is a trade-off of, and you can correct me here, but there's this trilemma that we talk about in crypto, which is, there's between security, scalability, and what's the last one? You know this better than I do. Exactly. And so where in that kind of trilemma, it sounds like you're saying you're accomplishing all three, But I am curious to get your take on what trade-offs are you making,
That's a good
or are you
question.
saying that you're, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think there's the trilemma is the trilemma, and I have another trilemma for you, which is, let me see how it is. Let's see, accurate, insightful trilemmas. Pick any two. Okay, so trilemmas are oversimplifications. They're typically not accurate, or typically they're not insightful, or else they're not trilemmas. So this trilemma that you mentioned was one that was that I think either Vitalik or Vlad proposed. There are other trilemmas. It's like it's kind of fashionable to come up with these in distributed systems. They appeal to the masses, but trilemmas are inherently oversimplifications. And this particular one has no science whatsoever behind it. It just kind of feels right to a bunch of people. So here's the thing. I can come up with trilemmas for shovels, right? And so you can make the shovel's head larger, the capacity increases, but then the force is higher on you. So then you're making a trade-off. And so, and then so for years and years, I can make you think that shovels cannot be bigger. Making the shovel head larger, increasing the capacity of a shovel will necessarily mean that you're trading something off, that you need to have bigger arms or whatnot. But then comes somebody with a steam shovel, and then it's a different ball game. There's still a set of trilemmas. There's still a set of trade-offs associated with the new technology. But the new tech is so different from the old tech that you've shifted the paradigm. So within the confines of a proof of work system, then you have a certain set of trade-offs, right? So for proof of work, there's energy in that trilemma. Within the confines of a proof of stake system that's using old school consensus technologies, then the trilemma you mentioned makes sense. If you're using classical consensus, if you are using, let's say, Tendermint underneath you, or if you're using signature accrual, like Ethereum 2 is using signature accrual, if you're using one of these technologies, then yes, that little triangle that you mentioned applies to you. And then if someone comes along and says, look, this is not how we do consensus anymore. These are old school. This is 1990s. They want their consensus protocol back. And instead we end up doing consensus in a very different manner with Avalanche. It's much more gossip based, and it's much less all-to-all messaging based. So once you go into that new paradigm, the consensus is different. The trade-offs are different, and so I think typically when people ask me, what are the trade-offs in Avalanche, what they really want to know is what's the weakest spot in the system. I will say upfront, and I've said this for many years now, the weakest part of Avalanche is the fact that it's so new and it introduces so much new technology. So that's the one thing that really is different from us. Everybody else is repurposing building blocks from 1990s. And here we are with a very different infrastructure, very different way of doing consensus. So I cautioned everybody about the newness of what we have been building. We're now 2 years in. The code has simmered a little bit. I am less concerned about how it is now than I was when we first initially launched it. But that would be the biggest concern that I would have as someone stepping into this. This thing has been vetted less than, let's say, Bitcoin.
Less than the effective. Yeah. I'm curious if you can expand just briefly on the consensus engine that you guys are using. You hinted at gossip-based versus messaging-based, which most other chains are using. Can you just explain that for our listeners at a high level?
Absolutely. So typical consensus protocols, ones we call classical consensus protocols, as well as the ones that are designed specifically for blockchains, are the ones that are based on signature accrual, the protocols at the heart of Ethereum 2. These old style protocols all work on the same basis. They have a set of voters that we call validators, and then there's a vote collection phase where every validator collects votes from his peers. That's really at the root of this. Think of it kind of like the US Senate passing a resolution. So somebody proposes a resolution, and if there is enough signatures on the resolution, it's enacted into law. And every senator is tasked with ensuring that there are enough signatures for him or her to treat this as the next law of the land. So those protocols then require every node to collect some data, some information from every other node. And that process is necessarily quadratic. It's n squared. 100 people each have to collect signatures from 99 others, and that's 100 times 100. So 100 times 100 is about 10,000 messages flying around, or 10,000 bits. But if you try to scale this up to millions of participants, million times a million is rather large, and it becomes really infeasible to run those protocols at those levels of decentralization. That's why the best of these protocols is limited to very small numbers of validators. So in comes Avalanche, and it uses an entirely different technique for achieving consensus. And very, very quickly, it works as follows. A senator, if you will, trying to see if there is enough support behind the bill. They don't go and ask every 99 other senator. They ask their friends who ask their friends who ask their friends. And the same coverage is achieved, but that same coverage is achieved without the same number of messages. So for those who are technical in the audience, there's a probabilistic step involved. So because we are not individually contacting everybody else, we have to rely on that probabilistic coverage. Those probabilities are set that the probability of any kind of an unwanted situation happening is 1 in 20,000 years. It's probabilistic in exactly the same way that Bitcoin is probabilistic. And but that step allows us to greatly simplify the messaging overhead.
And maybe, I guess, on this probabilistic scenario where things could get dicey is when, if you're to use your analogy, if the friends know that they're being asked the question, I guess you could use a random beacon like IBC is using to introduce some randomness and entropy in the system so that people don't anticipate that they're going to be asked, because otherwise they can collude, right? If all the friends know that they're going to be asked the question, then there's a risk of collusion, and therefore it compromises the integrity, the randomness that is required to reach true consensus, right? Because so how do you actually achieve that?
Absolutely, Santiago. So the polls that are going out, the polls that any individual node does of the other validators in the system have to be random, have to be unpredictable, and but that randomness does not have to be global. So we don't need a random beacon chain or a random beacon of any sort. You just have to toss a bunch of coins on your own locally and pick some random set of peers. It's as simple as that. So the security guarantees do not need global secure randomness. They're pretty nice.
When we think about this construct of a Nakamoto consensus, we talk about I'm going to introduce certain things that might not be all related, but you have this idea of how diverse is the validator set, how distributed, decentralized there's a hash rate, like the miners, are they all clustered in a particular geography, and so talk to us a little bit about the validator set in Avalanche, and how, because I would assume that would need to continue. It's fairly early, and it would need to continue to scale and grow in size so that you can achieve this true randomness, probabilistic randomness, right?
We would like to achieve, so the randomness is local, as I mentioned. The more nodes you add is strictly good for decentralization. And we would very much like to have a very diverse validator set, just like every other chain ought to. So you don't want a common failure to take out large portions of your validators and disable your network. So today, the Avalanche chain boasts of one of the largest sets of validators that are involved in every single decision. So we have I think we have every continent except Antarctica covered in our, we don't have a node in Antarctica yet. If anyone's listening to this and you have a node in Antarctica, we'd love to talk to you, and we'd love to help you set up an Avalanche node. But we are distributed across the globe. The number of actual true validators is on the physically distinct validators is on the order of 1,700 or so across the globe. And so, I think the speed of the system, despite the fact that so many nodes are involved in every decision, is unprecedented. It's about, as I mentioned, about a second to finality. So contrast this with many, many minutes to finality for Ethereum 2, many, many minutes to finality for any of the layer 2s. This thing is truly blazingly fast and decentralized. And we could have actually millions of validators. So if the number was 1,000-fold higher, it would mean very little from a performance perspective for this particular protocol because it's so fast.
And that number has been growing. If you asked just like 3 or 4 months ago, it was probably 11, 1200. So it's been growing.
I like hearing both you guys talk about Avalanche because you are highly convicted that you have the right that you are going down the right path here. And Emin, I think that's pretty obvious by your tweets as well. But there have to be some things that you both have learned from looking at other networks, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
so like one thing that comes to mind
Oh
maybe
yeah.
is staking, right? Like I remember you used to have to stake, I think it was 2000 Avalanche to validate a block. And I think you kind of criticize ETH's model, but now you're moving more towards maybe the ETH model. So I'm just curious, like maybe John on the biz dev side and growth side, and Emin more on the technical side. Like, what have you learned from other networks?
I will be the very first person to say that I stole prolifically from every single chain that came before us. So from Bitcoin, I learned quite a lot of things. To first of all, never compromise decentralization. If you're going to do that, it's just you're an agent of evil. You're trying to essentially subvert everything we stand for. So that's rule number one. Rule number two, Bitcoin does certain things incredibly well. And so one of those is asset transfers. So the Avalanche virtual machine actually has built-in ways of supporting assets with a finite issuance, assets with a multi-sig issuance, etc. Different kinds of assets, but you don't need to, for example, audit a contract to figure out what an asset does. The AVM supports it in exactly the same way the Bitcoin layer provides you with properties of Bitcoin that you don't have to audit. From Ethereum, of course, we learned exactly how important the EVM is for application developers. And we, of course, took the flexibility of a Turing complete scripting language. And in fact, we took EVM itself. From Waves, Waves was a system that did proof of stake earlier than many others. They were using one of my protocols that I developed when I was a professor. From Waves, we took a bunch of ideas about supporting different asset types as well. So I'm going to stop there. There are many other technical ideas at the lowest levels that we took from other chains. So lots and lots of kudos. Like we rise on the shoulders of other people who came before us. So I think what we try to do is provide the best of all blockchain science under one cover. John, do you want to take over on that?
Yeah, I do. It's not just, I'm sure people are building upon what we've learned from others and continue to try to improve. And that's what technology is all about. I think there's not just like ingenuity at the core engineering level, but the way Gün has set up the architecture is also brilliant from what he's learned collectively, not just on the blockchain, from technology in general. I mean, when I think of the XCP chain that you talked about earlier, Yano, it's actually very brilliant in the sense that you're segmenting operational risk. Each one of those things are doing specific functions so that if something goes down, it doesn't completely stall the entire engine. And it's almost like taking a page out of risk management and how to do that. So it's not just the actual learnings, but it's also the thought that's to make the learning improve the end result going forward.
I want to go back to something that you, Emin, said as your opening kind of statement, which is this idea of being truly decentralized. Perhaps a lot of the listeners now, last year, Solana was in the limelight in many ways. Now, not so much. I'm curious how you would compare yourself to a blockchain like Solana, and if you're seeing a lot of activity poured over from Solana into Avalanche, just given everything that's going on.
Yeah, good question. So Anatoly has done a fantastic job of engineering a fast, single chain, single purpose system. That's what Solana is. It's custom built for a small set of use cases, but it's designed so well, it's engineered incredibly well for those use cases. Now, what are those use cases? They tend to be around for example, as you might know, if you're a actual deep Solana user, that transactions are limited in size, because if you make them really big, arbitrarily big, for example, like Ethereum and others try to do, then suddenly your packet size gets bigger. All of a sudden, the types of things you have to do become much more complicated. And Solana gets its speed from cutting those corners, and it's got this super well engineered vehicle for supporting a single chain kind of a system with some but not unlimited flexibility. So that's how I would characterize Solana, and they built a fantastic community. And what we're seeing now is a bunch of crossover from people who realized that the sort of the what was going on behind the scenes with FTX and Solana. I think it's pretty clear by now that there was some manipulation going on there. So as those people look for other venues, Avalanche is very appealing to them. And so I would say the difference between us and Solana is this: we are theoretically on a different foundation. We're not getting our speed by virtue of having, eked out every single little component from our implementation. We're getting our speed from a different algorithm entirely. So we still have ahead of us, and that's what keeps me up at night, and that's what keeps me going every day. We still have ahead of us a lot of engineering challenges. We can get another 10x just by engineering alone from our current implementation. But fundamentally, we're fast because we use a different engine. So think of Solana as the best of V8s, and think of us as coming in with a jet engine. But early jet engines are, they're not usable on the roads and so forth. Like they're not all that great. They still need to be engineered for other cases. So that's, I think, the big difference between us. And there's a lot of crossover people coming to Avalanche from Solana now.
Yeah, I guess if you could just succinctly kind of like describe what that secret sauce is. I mean, you talk about kind of this step function improvement in the way you reach consensus. That makes this a jet engine versus everyone else who's kind of operating in a different kind of constraints. What was that breakthrough for you guys? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of more technical work ahead, which I would love to get into. But before we go there, I'm just kind of curious, what is that like step function improvement? I want to make sure that that's clear.
Sure. So I spoke a little bit about the consensus protocol and how it's different. So Solana is a signature accrual algorithm, just like Ethereum too. Solana has this design where they're collecting signatures. Every single validator is trying to collect signatures from every other validator. Now, Anatoly talks a lot about making all-to-all communication go fast, but he's at the end of the day doing all-to-all communication. And those nodes have to each be very, very fast and very beefy for that system to work well in perpetuity. So, and in fact, that's why they were having all those issues. In fact, that's half the reason why they were having all those issues. The other half the reason they were having issues is they ended up building a whole lot of bad feedback loops, if you will, where if something went wrong, then things cascaded. Case in point, if a Solana node was slow, then all of the transactions that got sent to him for creating the next block would have to then be sent to the next node. And if the system is under a lot of load, this creates a bad situation where if one guy is slow, then suddenly the next guy gets twice the load that he normally would get. And then that cascades from then on. And if that's kind of continuing, then these guys suddenly have an enormous load bubble that slows down their production. And suddenly, you end up having a Solana outage, etc. So there are a couple of things that are going on here. First of all, do not build systems with bad feedback loops. Second, make sure that the algorithms that you use underneath the covers are fast. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to re-describe the consensus protocol, but if you want that step function difference, Solana is trying to collect messages from a certain set of nodes, whereas we are not. We are also we are trying to collect responses from a very small number of nodes. They're collecting cryptographically signed signatures, which means milliseconds of signing overhead, whereas we're collecting secure bits over a secure pre-authorized line. So our process is a lot faster compared to what they have to do. And so these all add in. But as I said, there's a lot of stuff that they're also doing that we're not doing. So they do a couple of things with their database management that we are not doing. They end up dividing their data into a hot and a cold section, and the archival data they're essentially, as far as I understand it, there's no way to get to it. Like you can't actually validate their chain starting from Genesis all the way to the end because the archival data is not, at least API wise, not accessible. Whereas we are sort of more like a traditional blockchain. Everything is there. Anyone can authenticate from Genesis Vertex on down to today.
I'll add to that. I mean, depending on when you asked that question in 2020, 2021, the applications and the developers love the fact that there was instant finality. Love the fact that there was a great bridge, very seamless, the best bridge in the system that can move assets from Ethereum back and forth easily. They love the fact that, frankly, from a community perspective, the DeFi ecosystem grew tremendously and there was network effects there. I think if you ask that question back then and today, another variable is that the chain never goes down. It's always been on. And that's very valuable to developers who want to have assurance that the thing is turned on. Who wants to go watch a movie in a movie theater where it goes dark or the film gets cut off every 5 minutes? And today, if you ask, they love the subnet architecture, the customability that they can have, their own execution environment. And I think if you ask this question in 6 months from now, when we go from 5 to whatever, 50 or 100 new subnets, they're going to love the network effects from all these subnets working together as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to get there from your perspective, John, and I mean, feel free to comment here as well in terms of the security guarantees that you're getting. I mean, obviously, this gossip kind of type of, when you talk about this new algorithm, if you will, it's largely untested in cryptography. You have this kind of construct that is called Lindy effect. What kind of guarantees are you giving and assurances are you giving, and how is that resonating with the people that are moving over to Avalanche? When they ask you as part of the criteria, as part of an RFP, say, how are you, how secure are you relative to Ethereum or to Bitcoin or other chains? And I'm curious what the response is to that.
Great question. Let me give you some sort of vignettes. But I haven't done this exercise in a while now. I'm just realizing, so my numbers might be out of date. So Bitcoin security is provided by proof of work miners, and the capital that has gone into the mining set of miners, the proof of work miners that are computing the Bitcoin blockchain, is about 1 to 2% of Bitcoin's market cap. So if we do that math, let's just say, let's do it with is it $500 billion now, or is it 1 trillion? We do it with $1 trillion, you get a number. So 1% is about 10 billion. So that's sort of what you would need. I think you would need a third of that, about $3 billion. Now, $3.3 billion would be about what you might need to start launching meaningful attacks on Bitcoin. So that's the threshold for attack there. Ethereum, I haven't checked the numbers on how much is staked in ETH2, but it has a unique security model. It's actually, it's not 33% of the staked amount, because in each round, they talk to a smaller set of nodes. You could actually compromise Ethereum if you get lucky and end up compromising the slot. So the numbers there are different, and I haven't done that exercise, but I will give you the numbers for us. We are about let's say about 4 to 5 billion market cap coin, with about 70%, 80% of the coins staked for security, and all of those coins are involved in every decision. So our security budget is about 3.5 B or so, just back of the envelope calculation on the fly during this talk. I haven't checked any of these numbers. So and my math might be wrong, but I think that's our security budget. So for any given level, I think a proof of stake protocol has a great advantage compared to proof of work coins, because you don't have to buy miners, and so the security budget tends to be a lot larger. We have that going for us, and for Ethereum, because they do committee subselection, you can an attacker. Suppose you have 10% of the staked ETH and you want to launch an attack. Well, you'd have the 10%. Because of the committee subselection, you can get subsampled, and you might end up having far more of a representation in a slot than 10%. So the threshold required to attack Ethereum 2 is a lot lower than the traditional percentages we're used to, like 33%. So there is that compared to us and Ethereum 2 as well. And the same does not go for Tendermint. Tendermint is different. Tendermint just cannot scale to large numbers of participants. It's just a few hundred, and it provides 33% for the few hundred that manage to get in there. So that's my quick technical answer off the top of my head without checking numbers.
John, I want to throw it over to you because Emin, we've been hammering you with some technical questions here. John, on the BD side of things, there's this kind of behind the scenes like BD battle that's going on, and as an outsider looking in, it seems like there are a couple folks who've been doing pretty well, and some folks who maybe haven't stepped up their BD game at a time when it's needed. I'm just curious, like, how do you approach BD, especially given the like when as an outsider looking in, I see someone who seems to be having a lot of success, which is Polygon, right? Like winning a lot of deals with kind of the Web2 brands like the Disneys and the Metas of the world. Then there's some folks who've really focused like inside of crypto, like trying to nail getting, crypto native games onto their L1. I'm just curious, like, what is your overarching approach? How do you win that BD war?
So there's two different sides. One is the Web2 over, and that includes financial services firms. And then there is the crypto native. We've done quite well on both sides. Overarching thesis in BD has been that we're very relationship oriented. A lot of these other chains actually throw money at certain problems in order to solve it and to get relationships. What we've done is always led with technology and have a deeper, longer relationship. What we'll do is we'll work with them. We'll have, we'll get them plugged into our community, help them market. We will help them with our plugin if they're growing a product. We'll have our engineering and DevRel teams work with them as well. And we'll introduce them to other BD partners. And when they need to raise money, we help them with venture capitalists. So we really work with them. So that means it's a longer time process, but it's a deeper one. And we do it very strategically and tactically at the same time. In other words, we'll go through certain areas. We should talk a little bit about institutional DeFi that we will be launching in the future, but also we had, a great playground in regular DeFi to learn before we go into institutional DeFi. So it's very thoughtful at the strategic level as well as at the tactical level.
There are two deals I'd actually love for you to walk us through the kind of nitty-gritty details if you're open to it. One is Shopify and one is KKR, right? So KKR, one of the largest asset managers in the world. I think it's somewhere around $500 billion AUM. They worked with Avalanche to, and I think it was securitized to tokenize some amount of one of their funds. So I'd love to hear the details of that deal. And then there's something that you guys just did with Shopify. I haven't dug into it too deep recently, but also would love to hear the details of that. Could you walk us through kind of the behind the scenes, maybe the story that hasn't been shared with both of those?
I'll share as much as I'm allowed to share, especially with the financial services firms. So on the KKR, you're right. It was tokenizing a sliver of one of their funds. And there's really two goals for these large asset managers. One is to get operational efficiency. I mean, we can all understand how the blockchain as a backbone to the underlying rails of all this can be more efficient than the traditional way of doing things. In fact, KKR has 2 floors worth of people, literally 2 floors worth of people doing KYC, AML, and a lot of back office paperwork. The long-term goal for them is to really learn how blockchain can help create more efficiency and make things happen smoother and faster and more effectively. And then the other reason why a lot of these asset managers are doing this is because there's different universes that they can tap into for distribution in the long run. A lot of these asset managers are very well covered in terms of the endowments, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds. But there is a large growing group of, call it, qualified purchasers as well as accredited purchasers. So, some of these people have put together numbers close to 70 trillion of accredited and qualified that someday may want to go direct and buy some of these funds, in a different way than they currently do, paying fee on top of fee through intermediate distributors. So that is the trend I think you're going to see a lot more going forward. More asset managers trying to A, learn how to create back-end operational efficiency, and B, figure out what that distribution ultimately can be in the long run as these products become more common. It's no different from I remember my parents telling me in the 1970s, you bought mutual funds instead of buying stocks because you thought it was too complicated. The cost was too high and you didn't know if this was a good company to buy or not. Over time, you said, well, you went to the Peter Lynch School of Investing, buy what you buy, literally buy stocks that you buy personally in consumer products. And the product is good or the service is good. That will happen over time with funds. and private securities as well through blockchain technology and the tokenization of assets. On the Shopify deal, we're very excited about that. That's the very beginning of a longer relationship. Right now, they're doing NFTs through another payment mechanism on Avalanche, but that is just the very beginning of what we're working on. In fact, I have calls set up with them to further that partnership going forward.
And John, maybe I'm curious in the vein of, you talk about how Avalanche is more kind of makes it more comfortable from a regulatory perspective, and I'm curious. I'm sure you have a ton of conversations with other folks like KKR that have said, you know what, I'm not ready. I don't want to do it just yet. Can you maybe quantify the impact that FTX and other collapses of last year and in recent blockchain history have dissuaded and kind of set back your BD efforts?
From an institutional perspective, listen, I think it's obvious, with what's happening, there's a lack of trust in the space. So that's paused a lot of these deals to move forward. I think, I don't have to tell you that, it's pretty obvious, but it's a pause. Activity is still happening. I mean, even after KKR, Apollo is raising a tokenized fund. JP Morgan has continued to do JP Morgan Guardian as well as a JP Morgan coin. We are still talking to a ton of asset managers as well as other traditional financial players. Maybe it's a little slower now, but it's still continuing. So sure, it's it's a speed bump, I would say, is the right way to characterize it, but we have to work through it.
How real is it this time? Because of course there's us that have been around for a while that have seen this movie in 2017 where it became fashionable to use the word blockchain in public, 10Ks to, say, hey, we're being relevant. Where it sounds like you're getting traction a lot on the financial front. Are there other verticals where this is real, and what can we expect?
So let's finish the first part of that question.
I
think
let them go there.
This is a lot different than the other cycles. I think with this FTX situation, every traditional financial services firm now is waiting for the rules to play itself out, and because they don't want to do anything that may be deemed, not compliant, just because the rules have not been properly laid down. But we're seeing in Europe with Mika, and I think Mika's done a really good job, and it's at the final edges of it, where they actually classify different assets into different buckets. And I think that's key. We need to do that in the US. So in a weird way, in the medium term, sure, the FTX thing has hurt the short term, but in the medium term, if we can have more certainty in regulation and rules, it will actually accelerate in the medium term, because banks and financial services firms will have more clarity. In terms of other areas, and part of the reason why we're working with Shopify, there's no doubt that consumer areas where there's less regulation and things that could be tokenized faster. So there's reasons to do things over there as well. But the real issue is when it's easier, there's less value created by just tokenizing things left and right, especially like an NFT. But when you can actually rewire the financial services engines that has been created over 100 years, there is a lot of value that you can create.
So John, maybe we should add to this the fact that every time you and I talk to a Wall Street firm, they already understand the concept of a digital asset. They already understand the concept of issuing tokens. So that is qualitatively different, Santiago, as I'm sure you'll remember, from 2017. So different. So every time I talk to them, I feel great. And it's not just the financial people. They tend to be the savviest ones, of course. But it's also the gaming companies are now coming on board. And, we have a bunch of games already launched on us that are doing more transactions per second. They were doing more transactions per second than Ethereum. And so they're very popular. They're already gaining traction. And there are many other games to come. I think that segment is another one. The NFT space is strong, as you know. It's kind of inward oriented. It's the people who do that are people who are already savvy with blockchains. So I'm not sure if it's expanding, but it's a different kind of crowd too. But in any case, that's an exciting crowd and an exciting use case. And there are many other real world assets that want to come on board, that want to be digitized, that people have in their possession. And in the post-pandemic new economic order, I think there's going to be more of an impetus to get those digitized, to get them offered to the globe with great reach, with all of the benefits of having a blockchain underneath. So we're exploring this. It's such an exciting time, if you ask me.
I think we can all agree that there's been a collective effort of the industry to educate a lot of people. So fast forward a year or two from now, you have hundreds of subnets. You know, I think you recently announced this warp messaging system feature, if you will, this sort of communication protocol between subnets. I'm curious. When we think about scalability, at least in the construct of Ethereum and other chains, we talk about composability breaking a lot. Can you talk about this communication between subnets, the efficiencies that you might have, and in the context of composability?
Absolutely. So what Warp does is it allows any two subnets to send messages or to do invocations across subnet boundaries. So I might have a US-based asset, and I might have a subnet for it, and I don't know, maybe it's real estate, etc. You might have another asset that's, let's say, EU-based. You have a different set of validators; they conform to EU law, and etc., etc. Now we can trade those two things for each other using Warp. Behind the scenes, Warp uses BLS signatures, which are aggregate signatures. They're very, very efficient in constructing a compact signature that authorizes the operation to happen on the destination side. So it's that the problem, as you mentioned, is as you go to different divisions, if you will, this is definitely true in the case of layer twos. When you have different layer twos, liquidity in one layer two is unavailable and inaccessible to another one. Well, with Warp, you end up having a subnet that's able to essentially invoke messages across a subnet boundary. It's not like invoking a message in the same subnet in the sense that it's not synchronous. I can't say, go do this immediately in one transaction. The pattern that's used for communication is asynchronous. So I have to say, hey, please do this. And then it happens on the other side and the response comes back. So there's a slight bit of a change, but that is the change, the decoupling that allows these subnets to operate without having to couple with each other, without having to slow each other down. So that in turn allows us to get enormous speed ups by creating this structure. So that's sort of what Warp does.
Warp is really great because it's a very lightweight solution. Some of the messaging solutions elsewhere is not this lightweight. And part of the reason is because, you're staking on the P chain and therefore the registry is there, and it makes it a lot easier than some other, messaging solutions where you have to go through a more rigorous process.
What does this actually enable though, that you're not able to do now? Does it just, my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong here, it allows applications to publish information to the C chain once, and then that kind of makes it immediately verifiable on any subnet on the Avalanche network. So for example, you could have like a chain link feed on the C chain that can get pushed downstream to any subnet on the network. So it's kind of published once, like distribute everywhere. Is that the major application, or am I totally missing something?
No, that's one of the cases, but let me try to distill it for the audience. So if you have a single chain system, everybody who uses that chain has to be coupled together. And if you are using it for your app, then you drive the fees up and everybody else now has to pay high fees. So there's no isolation. And if Santiago has enormous load so that the system is slowing down, then the performance of the system will drop down as well. And that, of course, creates, again, lack of performance isolation. So fee isolation isn't there with a single chain. Performance isolation isn't there. When you have a subnet, then you can have a particular DApp, a DEX, for example, on its own chain. And the fees it pays for its performance, its activity, are decoupled from the main one. So if you end up having, you can have a subnet dedicated to a DEX. So Trader Joe or Dexalot can have their own subnets so that the people can, whoever wants to use them can pay tiny, tiny fees. If you want to have a subnet dedicated to Chainlink feeds, well, then that can proceed at very, very low fees, and people can import information from those subnets. And so if there's a game that requires a lot of transactions, the game load is borne by the nodes that operate the game, and that load does not impact the rest of the C chain, for example. So those are the use cases. A couple of use cases. There are many others, especially for enterprises.
There's a thread on Twitter. I got to give this person a shout out. Kingsley. I don't know, some account, but it was like all the bull arguments basically for Avalanche. It was like Avalanche scales through L1s. They support any VM. They support their Avalanche is interoperable. Avalanche is decentralized. Avalanche is performant. Avalanche is cheap. Avalanche is reliable. Great thread. I'm sure you guys would like it. Now, they also had some bear arguments at the end, though. They said some of the main one of the main obstacles right now is governance, which is they said a couple of the main drawbacks were a wallet, but you guys solved that with core. Communication, which you for subnets, kind of like IBC, but you just solved that with this AWN thing that you're launching. It sounds like one of the main drawbacks now for people in the community is on-chain governance. So would love to hear what your plans are for on-chain governance this year.
So when we launched Avalanche, one of the things we wanted to support was governance. And shortly after launching Avalanche, we ended up implementing on-chain governance. But at the moment, we are a little unclear about the regulatory status of doing governance on-chain. And there are also some technical concerns about doing governance on-chain. So we would never do anything that would jeopardize the status of Avalanche as a commodity. It's a commodity. It's used for gas and so forth. So that's what's keeping on-chain governance from being rolled out in the code, say tomorrow. And so there are some regulatory concerns we need to wait through. In general, I'm a fan of on-chain governance, but there are technical arguments against it, as you know, and often, it's just, we can go into the details if you want to. There's a debate to be had there, but yes, we do not have on-chain governance right now, and that's something we initially wanted to have. I would love to have a conversation around it, but I think all of these are premature unless we have some guidance from regulators, because they seem to not like any idea of any coin that allows the coins to act kind of like the way stocks act. People will hear me and they will think I'm defending this position. I think this is a crazy position. It's bogus and it's entirely wrong at its root. But it's not my argument. I'm just worried about that. And there are regulators who think like this, and that's what's giving me pause.
So the purpose, I guess, we've seen a whole set of governance tokens that purport to just be, voting. Mapping voting, whether economic shares, like you have a certain amount of tokens, they correspond to a certain amount of voting power, but don't promise anything other than just being purely governance based. I'm curious why you think that by introducing governance into the Avalanche system, it would, cause some sort of tension issues from a regulatory perspective. I mean, the purpose of Avalanche now is to secure the chain, right? Governance has historically, for other projects at least, hasn't been an issue. So, I'm curious why you think that is, and when other projects haven't perhaps found that to be problematic.
So once again, I am not saying any of these things. I am channeling other people who are saying these things, and I'm concerned about what these people are saying. There are regulators out there who are concerned that coins that allow the holder to vote make those coins act a lot like a stock certificate. Remember how if you own a stock of a company, you can vote in its decisions. And therefore these people believe that those coins are closer to securities than others. And so that's a concern. And, as I fully agree with you, it makes absolutely no sense. I think that's where you're coming from. When you say that other coins have done this, yes, they have, but they haven't been given the green light. And
right, I'm not endorsing that. I'm just
right.
Objectively stating what I'm seeing.
Right, it did happen. You were right, but none of them. There are no great, clear guidelines here, and we're all trying to anticipate what might or might not happen. And so I would not want to do something with Avalanche that would jeopardize Avalanche's commodity position. So we haven't turned that feature on. That's really my main worry. Otherwise, we would
Yeah.
have that discussion in the community and turn it on.
Right. I guess one of the as an investor and part of the community, one of the things that I look for the most is how healthy is the developer ecosystem? How easy is it for new developers to come learn the language, program, and start building applications? Can you comment on that?
Sure.
Yep.
Let me give people a very quick rundown of our community, like just a couple of vignettes again. So we have a thriving community. We did exactly the right thing by picking the EVM as a foundational thing to build on. So if you're familiar with the EVM, you have a home at Avalanche. Most of us are also Ethereum people or were Ethereum people at some point, and so that's one. So there are many developers with that background. Whatever you learned in terms of programming Solidity, immediately entirely useful. We are entirely compatible with EVM bytecode. So second, the fact that Avalanche has these VMs that are pluggable means that you can build your own VM. We support a Rust-based VM SDK. So if you're a Rust programmer, you can build on top of us. You can build your own VM in Rust. If you are a Go programmer, the code base is written in Go. So there are a bunch of people with those backgrounds who are building on top of us. When it comes to high-level dApps, all of the blue chip dApps that you are familiar with, maybe save for Uniswap. Uniswap, I don't think has come on to us yet. But all of the others, Aave and others, of course, are all on Avalanche. So you will find a bunch of ready building blocks. There's everything you might imagine, flash loans, etc. There are lots and lots of dApps that support these. So I think it's a very strong community. Qualitatively speaking, our community is younger. So the Ethereum folks have had a lot of time to simmer, and we've attracted, I think, the next wave of bright young minds who really like the tech. And so they're not as crypto savvy, and it is what it is. And I think they're just sort of now finding their footing with the incredibly powerful infrastructure underneath them. A lot of the innovation in DeFi has been happening on Avalanche. When Ethereum fees were insanely high, Avalanche was ticking along at like 50 cents a transaction or $2 a transaction at its peak. At 250, I was getting hate messages, and then we did a bunch of optimizations that allowed everybody to, that allowed the system to run a little faster and got the fees down again. So overall, we've had a lot of people come on to us. Oh, if you are looking for stable swaps and so forth, the most efficient are found on Avalanche. I think even better than the best on Ethereum. So take a look at the community. It's, whatever you might have in mind. Lots and lots of gamers are coming to us. There are lots of games that are building their own subnets. John, am I missing?
So it's not just DeFi.
I would, for the newer people listening in, I would invite them to come into the Discord channels. I would invite them to go to the Avalanche Developer Conference in May. And they, Gun's absolutely right, but they should find out for themselves. Every time, we've worked with a team, allowing them to see it firsthand is really, really eye-opening for them.
Yeah, I was in, for context, I was in the Barcelona conference. Was that your first one last year? And I was was pretty impressed with the cohort, and it sounded like a pretty diverse set of teams.
It was great. Yeah, thank you for coming by. It was such a blast. I had so much fun.
It was. This year it's going to be May 3rd through the 5th.
Okay.
Guys, I want to start to wind us down here and kind of take this podcast home. I have a couple of maybe broader, zooming out from Avalanche, like broader, maybe macro views of crypto type of questions I'd love to get your takes on. Maybe for both of you, I'm really curious to hear your take. There's all these new L1s launching, like the Aptoses and Suis of the world. There's still Solana, ETH. There's these L2s. There's Cosmos, obviously. How much room do you guys think there is for more L1s in a big multi-chain future with several different L1s? Or do you think that the future in the next couple of years, we're going to see liquidity concentrate on just maybe one or two or maybe even three chains?
So let's go back and talk about how we defined a blockchain earlier. You have to execute, you have to settle, consensus, and have data availability. So a lot of those L1s you just mentioned, they're really not a blockchain, a fully functional blockchain. So we need to separate the conversation slightly. For people who really want a fully functional blockchain, you have a different construct in the subnet. Now, for us to see the call it the crypto ecosystem develop with all of these other roll-ups or whatever you want to call it. Reality is the more we can get involved, the better it is for the whole space. Right now, there's still very few people in crypto, developers in crypto relative to developers in Web2. It's just a small fraction. I think whatever gateway they use to come in through Avalanche, through others, it's okay because ultimately, we've seen a lot of developers start elsewhere, but ultimately also land on Avalanche when they want to try out and go multi-chain.
So I'm going to be a little bit more pointed. Let me just say this.
You don't say it.
The world, the world does not need another virtual machine, right? It's another general purpose virtual machine. The EVM, is it the ultimate? No. Would I do it differently? There are many micro decisions taken in it that I wouldn't have taken them that way. I would have, for example, come up with a native size for operations that's a lot less than 256 bits, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of things that I would have done that would have led to a far more efficient virtual machine, but none of those matter. So the Aptoses, the Suis of the world, I don't think they really represent any kind of a material increase in our capabilities. Whatever they can do, we can already do with the EVM. So I could see the case for a Tezos-like approach, because a virtual machine that allows you to reason about applications would be an interesting one. But these new things are not those. And what I see happening here is that people saw that we were at a technological impasse, that L1s garnered a lot of attention, and they want to repeat the experience with just a narrative. And just because you have a new system, a new virtual machine, doesn't mean you have a new business case, a new reason for adoption. So the world wasn't clamoring for the Move virtual machine. And there are no Move users right now. So I think this is that set of people are going to find that it's not going to pan out. But, who am I to make guesses? So the second thing I should mention is that as we move forward, the technological barriers, the people who actually know how to overcome technological barriers are going to be the ones who win. And the systems that can absorb growth are going to be those that win. There won't be a single chain that emerges as the leader. There will be a set. It won't be a big set, though. It's not going to be 15, 20, set of 15 or 20. There will be new L1 releases. All of these coin distribution events, they're kind of like a self-perpetuating cycle, and there will always be people who are trying to get in early in the hope that they can get out, etc. But a lot of these end up with people holding empty bags at the very end of the day. So I don't really see the need for all of these new L1s that people come in. I hear this every now and then. It's like, I want the L1 premium. I want to collect the L1 premium. Well, the L1 premium is there only for people who bring something new to the table. Avalanche did that. And if you're coming in now in 2023 and you're recycling old protocols and you're just adding, it's kind of like I invented a new hat by putting a feather on an old hat. Okay, well, it's novel. It's a different hat, but it's still a damn hat. At the end of the day, you did not really change anything fundamental. And there's a fellow here with an umbrella. He brought something entirely new to the scene. So I think these plays are kind of asinine. I'm not a big believer in this, like, more waves of L1s to come. And I think people will catch on to the fact that every L2 is a cannibalistic thing. It cannibalizes the system it's built on. And these L2s are not necessarily good for the L1s that they're built on. They're all each unique and individual and separate, and they divide the user base. They fracture. So I think in response to these, there's going to be, at least the savvy users will want to look for a solution that is more of a large framework that allows everybody to coexist and to take advantage of already built Lego pieces that exist already.
Nice. I'll give you guys 30 seconds each for this last final question of the podcast. What are one or two things that you two are most excited about for Avalanche that we should be aware of coming up this year? John, maybe you want to kick it off, and Emin, you can.
I'm super excited about the subnet growth on Avalanche and the great pipeline that exists there, and also some of the institutional stuff and tokenizing real world assets.
Well, now you stole everything I was going to say. So I'm excited about those as well. Subnet growth is fantastic. Tokenizing new assets is fantastic. The thing I'm super excited about this year is the outreach we're going to be doing to the community. I think our community is supremely nice, has been incredibly supportive, incredibly sweet. and they've brought us to where we are today. I'm going to be working extra hard to bring opportunities in the blockchain space to them, whether it's in the form of educational stuff or career development stuff, connecting people stuff. But in all of those areas, I want the best builders to continue to build on Avalanche, the most innovative technological platform in blockchains.
Gün,
that's great.
John, this is great, man. Both you guys. Appreciate you guys for coming on. This is really interesting deep dive into Avalanche. So thank you guys for all your time.
Thank you. A lot of fun.
Thank you, guys. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.